For tonight's Conversations with Great Minds, I'm joined by Jeffrey Smith. Jeffrey is a leading consumer advocate in the fight against the use of genetically modified foods. He's counseled leaders on every continent and influenced some of the first state laws in the United States regulating the use of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Jeffrey has been described as the leading world expert in the understanding and communication of the health issues surrounding genetically modified foods. He is the author of numerous critically acclaimed books on genetically modified foods, including Genetic Roulette, the documented health risks of genetically engineered foods. Jeffrey joins me now in the studio. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Back in the 80s, when the GMOs were first coming out, there were no laws, there were no regulations, and Monsanto actually went to the, I believe it was the Bush administration? It was the Reagan administration.
Right.
Okay. And said, we'd like you to regulate us.
Right.
What was this all about? What happened?
Well, you see, Monsanto has not been a very popular company for decades because of continually lying about the toxicity of their products. So they figured if the government gave a rubber stamp to it and it looked like it was the government approving it, then they were kind of off the hook. And in the next decade, they got what they wanted, a rubber stamp that meant nothing, but it gave the illusion that the government was regulating GMOs.
How so?
Well, the person in charge of policy at the FDA was Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney. He had been put in that position because the White House, under the first Bush administration, instructed the FDA to promote biotechnology. And so they brought in Michael Taylor to be in charge. The policy claims that the agency is not aware of any information showing that GMOs are significantly different, and therefore no testing or labeling was necessary.
That's the actual language. In fact, we have a graphic of this. We can show it on the screen. The FDA declares GMOs no different. This is graphic number 1, actually.
Here we are?
Yeah, there you go. The agency is not aware of any information showing that foods. This is verbatim what you just said.
This is the actual
policy.
And this was
written by a guy who worked for Monsanto, quit his job, went to work for the government.
Then went back to Monsanto as their VP, and now is back as at the FDA as U.S. Food Safety Czar.
You're kidding?
No. But it gets worse. You see, when a lawsuit was filed against the FDA, they were forced to turn over their secret internal memos, 44,000 of them. And it turns out that the statement in the policy was a lie, that it was actually the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA that GMOs were dangerous and should be carefully tested. They warned against toxins, allergens, new diseases, and nutritional problems. And they complained about the proposed regulation that came out.
That's remarkable. So, and in fact, you have some examples here. The genetically modified potatoes. This this photo of GM potatoes number 2. Damaged rats. Tell us about this.
Well, in this case, the rats ate genetically engineered potatoes, engineered to produce an insecticide. It's not on the market. It was an experiment.
So this is sort of like the BT corn that produces Bacillus thermophilus.
Very similar, very similar. But what they did was they found that the potatoes that ate the rats that ate natural potatoes that were spiked with the same insecticide that the GM potatoes produced, they didn't get sick. So it was only the process of genetic engineering that could be implicated, the same process that's used for the soy and corn that are already on the market.
Could it be that if the toxin, the insecticide, if it's externally applied to the potato, everything is outside of cellular membranes, and so the body can somehow distinguish that, the digestive tract, whereas if it's endogenous, if it's the product of the potato itself growing, it would permeate every cellular structure of the potato.
In this case, they guarded against that because they had tested this particular insecticide at doses of 700 times higher than were produced in the potato, and they had no effect on the rats. But we do know the process of genetic engineering causes massive collateral damage in the DNA. And so there could be hundreds or thousands of mutations.
In the DNA of the potato?
Of the plant, right. So the corn, for example, has a new allergen. Monsanto's BT corn has a completely new allergen that was not evaluated by the FDA or anyone and only found out afterwards.
By allergen, you mean something that causes human beings to react allergically to?
Exactly.
Okay.
And Monsanto's soybeans have as much as 7 times higher levels of an existing soy allergen, et cetera. And these things are not evaluated.
Now, just to go back to this GM potatoes, the consequence of this in this graphic, the rats developed potentially precancerous growth in the digestive tracts. We have a picture of that in just a second. Smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and immune system damage.
In 10 days.
In 10 days.
Yes.
It seems to me that all you would have to do on your website to get the average American, at least the average American male, to pay attention to this is put, Monsanto gives you smaller testicles.
I have one that's better. Male rats fed genetically modified soy, the testicles changed from pink to blue.
Oh my.
I have pictures of that.
Wow.
And when I show it, I kind of just take a sip of water and say, I'll let that one sink in for a while.
Yeah, yeah. The next graphic we have, I believe, is the stomach lining.
Yes.
And these are the stomach linings. Now this is to scale. So the lining cells. This is the endothelium, epithelium, none of the above.
It's the stomach lining.
It's the stomach lining. Okay. The stomach lining is thicker.
Yeah.
What are we seeing here?
This is called potentially precancerous cell growth. There's no tumors yet found, but it's proliferative cell growth. For some reason, the cell architecture is completely different in the rats that ate the genetically modified potato. Right. But here's the scary thing. When a pediatrician named Michelle Perro saw these research studies, she said, uh-oh, we've got a problem. This is what we're seeing in our children. She has seen changes in the digestive capacity and the digestive effects in children that are different than they were 30 years ago. Kids that are allergic to everything, or have failure to thrive, can't eat anything. And we see that this kind of disruption may be throughout the American population, because inflammatory bowel disease is up 40% since GMOs were introduced, colitis, ulcers, etc. Now, we've interviewed thousands of doctors and their patients over time who've prescribed non-GMO diets, talked to them. They said they're prescribing non-GMO diets to every patient. And as we describe their results, it turns out these kind of things are seen. The gastrointestinal problems are on the rise, but when they switch to non-GM, a lot of them go away within days.
Wow.
And with livestock, it's the same way. With pigs that were fed genetically modified soy as their regular diet, they were switched to non-GM soy. Diarrhea problems disappeared in 2 days. Ulcers, bloat, etc. Deaths from them disappeared completely. We're seeing changes in cattle, pigs, dogs, cats, and humans when they go from GM to non-GM. And it's very similar what's happening.
We're seeing an epidemic in the United States right now of what's being referred to as gluten intolerance,
right.
Celiac disease, wheat intolerance. I can testify to this.
Really?
I came back from Australia about a decade, well, it was 9/11, the day before 9/11. And I'd gotten really, really sick there from Giardia, this parasite that infects the water supply in Sydney. And took a bunch of antibiotics, somehow nuked my guts. And ever since then, I've been able to eat wheat. I eat anything with wheat and I get really sick. Could it be, and it's like, in that decade, from that until now,
explosion.
It's like everybody I know is like this. And restaurants now are saying, oh, you want the gluten-free menu. It's like, a decade ago I'd say that and they go, what?
Or it's like, you still eat gluten?
Yeah, right. And could it be that, not to hyper-personalize this, but that kind of thing, that intolerance to gluten isn't really an intolerance to gluten. It's either A, an intolerance to GMO gluten, or B, it is a change in the body that's the consequence of eating other GMO foods, or it's being maintained, because I eat a lot of corn now because I can't eat wheat, so I eat things in tacos. And if I'm eating them in a restaurant, the odds are they're GMO corn. So I'm continually, can you riff on that a little bit? Are we onto something here?
I think we are. I think we are. When I describe, for example, the BT corn, which you described, the corn engineered to produce its own insecticide, when I describe that at medical conferences, the doctors go, oh my God. This could explain the increase in gastrointestinal problems in my practice since GMOs were introduced in 1996. BT toxin, it's designed to break open the stomach of insects and kill them.
Right.
Now, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, there's no impact on human cells and it's destroyed during digestion. They got it wrong. February of this year, Journal of Applied Toxicology, they took the BT toxin out of Monsanto's corn, applied it to human cells. It poked holes in the cells, causing leakage, the same kind of holes that may kill insects. Last year in Canada, they found 93% of pregnant women had BT toxin in their blood, as well as the blood of 80% of their unborn fetuses. So if BT toxin is drilling holes in our intestinal walls and causing disruption of the lining of our digestive tract, then it could be causing the problems that we're seeing. Now, you mentioned antibiotics. The other type of GM crop are Roundup-ready crops, engineered not to die when sprayed with Roundup. So it's a weed-killing technology. The Roundup ends up in the food. The Roundup is an antibiotic. We eat the antibiotic. It not only has all these, cancer-promoting and endocrine disruption properties, but it can also potentially kill the gut bacteria that's helpful for our immune system and our digestive system. So all this kind of disruption can be wreaking havoc on the human diet in North America, and we're seeing these kind of changes in the increased disorders since 1996.
Is there a control? Are there other countries that have similar wealth to the United States, similar dietary habits to the United States, but don't use genetically modified foods? And if so, do they have different incidences of these kinds of problems?
Yes, the United States is falling behind Europe. The United States gets sicker more often than Europeans. The United States is falling behind in terms of infant mortality and longevity, etc. So Europe is a good example. In fact, there's another genetically modified food called bovine growth hormone injected cows in the dairy products that come out.
RGBH.
Right, and they compared the rate of fraternal twins in the UK compared to the US and found it was much bigger in the US, and they blamed that on RBGH because it increases the incidence of fraternal twins.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I've seen a lot of speculation too that somehow these hormones, I can't identify any particular one, but the increasing cocktail of hormones that we're giving our animals are contributing to the breast cancer epidemic in this country as well, and possibly prostate cancers and all these hormone-mediated cancers.
And the bovine growth hormone increases IGF-1, which is linked to breast cancer. Premenopausal women with high levels of IGF-1 are 7 times more likely to develop breast cancer. So what I just said, because I spoke pretty quickly, was when you take this injection and you inject cows, the milk has higher levels of a cancer-promoting hormone. A former Monsanto scientist told me that 3 of his colleagues found such high levels of IGF-1 in the milk from cows treated with Monsanto's drug. These 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow.
Wow, amazing. More with Jeffrey Smith right after the break. Roulette, the documented health risks of genetically engineered foods. Let's get back to it. We talked about celiac disease, intolerance, allergies. All these things are exploding. Autism is something that has been really in the headlines recently. Back 20, 30 years ago, it was 1 in several thousand children. Now it's 1 in several hundred children.
88.
1 in 88 born in the autistic spectrum. Some of that apparently is the consequence of better detection or changes in our definitions of what is and what isn't autism, but that can't account for more than a very, very small percentage of that change. And there's all this speculation, the mercury, the thimerosal, all these other things. You're suggesting that genetically modified organisms may be connected to this?
I think it may be a contributor, but many scientists and doctors also agree. In fact, in my film coming out called Genetic Roulette, it'll be out in August, we interview 3 different parents, including a medical doctor, that took their kids off of genetically modified foods and saw changes in behavior and gastrointestinal distress. One of the scientists that I work with gave a talk in Germany and described the behavioral, physiological, and neurological changes in laboratory animals and livestock that were fed genetically modified feed. And an autism specialist came up to him afterwards and said, these are exactly what we're seeing in autistic children. The gastrointestinal problems, the gut permeability, the changes in the bacterial balance, and behavioral changes are found in the rats, in the mice, in the pigs, in the cows that they've been tested.
And now in our kids.
In our kids.
And now in our kids. And is this in utero exposure or after birth exposure?
We haven't gotten that far.
Mom through breast milk? Or?
It's hard to say. We do know that inside the in utero you have the Bt toxin and the Roundup.
They both pass through
we know that.
into the amniotic fluid, past the placental
And of course the blood-brain barrier is not well developed at all, and so if things like if the Bt toxin, which breaks open pores in human cells, if that gets in the brain, we have no idea if that's going to be leading to developmental disorders.
Now, in our last segment, I asked you if there was a control group against which the United States could be measured. And
I'm trying to be on a control group by avoiding GMOs myself.
Well, good on you. I don't know how to do it, and I want to get to that in a minute because this is one of the big problems here in America. But in any case, you said Europe. What's the status of GMOs in Europe?
Well, the person who did this potato study was gagged and fired and threatened within 2 days of going public with his findings. But after 7 months, he was invited to speak before Parliament. The gag order was lifted. A firestorm erupted.
He was a European scientist?
A European scientist. Okay. He had been hired to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs, so he was an insider. When his gag order was lifted in February of 1999, within 10 weeks, the tipping point of consumer rejection was achieved because using GMOs had become a marketing liability. So Kraft, Unilever, Nestle's, the major food companies have all removed GM ingredients from the European brands, but not in the U.S., where most people are unaware.
Wow. So was Europe for some period of time using GMO foods?
Yes.
Is it possible to see, a change in that, over time that correlates to that with things like, autism or IBS or whatever? We
did see that soon after GM soy was introduced to the UK, soy allergy skyrocketed by 50% in a single year.
What year was that?
This was in 1999,
okay.
Just before they removed it.
Right.
And in the article that came out, the York laboratory was saying this could implicate genetically engineered soy. But I think the government stepped in and they wouldn't release the report and they stopped speaking about it. It's the same government that jumped on Arpad Pusztai, who discovered the problems with the potatoes.
Remarkable. India has had apparently a real problem with GMO products, and that problem has been more economic. I mean, we've been talking medical here.
Well, there's medical too there.
Well, I'm assuming that there's that as well, but Deepak Chopra said that using GMOs are risking our extinction as a species. He was talking about medical. Vandana Shiva has just done some brilliant work on the thousands, tens of thousands of farmers who are committing suicide.
250,000.
250,000.
250,000 farmers, according to Vandana Shiva, have committed suicide, and she says at least 3/4 are due to BT cotton, genetically engineered cotton, engineered to produce the BT toxin to kill insects. Now, basically,
so what's the relationship between that and suicide?
Okay, they borrow heavily to buy the more expensive seeds and associated chemicals. The BT cotton is unreliable, and when it doesn't even pay back enough to allow the people to pay their loans, they commit suicide. They're going to have to lose the land. And they have found about 95 out of 100 homes where they knock on the doors and say, what's the cause of the suicide? It's BT cotton. And there was leaked documents from the government, which has always said, oh, it's not BT cotton. But the documents now say, in fact, it is BT cotton.
Why? Why would BT cotton be any different than, regular cotton, and why wouldn't the farmers just grow regular cotton?
Right now, it's impossible to even get regular cotton in many of the districts because Monsanto has basically taken over the market, making it virtually impossible to find it.
It's a monopoly.
Yes.
How do they achieve that?
Well, they purchase it. They also went to extensive lengths of advertising and disinforming. So they had Bollywood actors, spiritual leaders, etc., converting the minds of the people, saying, oh, you're going to make a lot of money and a lot of money. So even though independent research was tracking a reduction in income, Monsanto was claiming just the opposite and broadcasting that to the farmers. So they were basically twisting their arm to get them to invest in the seeds that were going to make them rich, and a lot of them committed suicide.
And this is ongoing?
Oh, yeah. In addition, people, when they pick the cotton, are getting itching and rashes all over their bodies. And when they allow animals to graze on the cotton plants after harvest, many of the animals die. I visited one village where they had allowed their buffalo to graze on normal cotton plants for 8 years. They allowed them to graze on BT cotton plants for a single day, and all 13 buffalo died.
And the BT plants have a built-in insecticide, which is arguably a poison. Right. Given all this,
yes,
why aren't Americans more outraged?
Because Americans have been disinformed. You may have said it earlier, feed the world through GMOs. The experts don't think so. No one really believes it. In fact, GMOs actually reduce yield. But if you ask the average American, because $250 million at the turn of the century was spent on convincing Americans that GMOs were needed to feed the growing population.
But the argument, yield, my understanding is that the main argument of GMOs historically has not been yield. It's been that, this crop will grow just as well as any other crop, but it's been genetically engineered to have its own antibiotic in it or its own its own insecticide, and therefore it's less expensive to grow because you don't have to pour insecticide on it. Or in Roundup Ready, for example. Roundup Ready, you can use Roundup, which is a herbicide, nukes weeds,
right.
but Well, actually describe Roundup Ready. What is the story with this?
So scientists found bacteria growing near Monsanto's factory that wasn't dying in the presence of Roundup herbicide. It was in a chemical waste dump.
Right.
And they figured, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene that allowed the bacterium to survive Roundup, took it out and put it into soybeans. Now you can spray Roundup over a field of soybeans and all of the other plant biodiversity dies, but not the soybeans. So you can have a completely clean field with no weeds. And if you go down to Argentina, there's miles and miles of basically sterile outdoors.
Whereas normally if you sprayed Roundup on a bunch of soybeans, they would die along with all the other weeds as well.
Right.
So now we're ingesting Roundup.
It's worse than that, because the Roundup actually is thought to be creating a proliferation of a new type of organism that may be linked to miscarriages and infertility. A group of scientists wrote a letter to Tom Vilsack, which was leaked onto the internet, the Secretary of Agriculture, and described how this organism, when isolated, when it was exposed to pregnant chickens, it killed the embryo within 48 hours. When they have ranches or farms with high levels of miscarriages, they look at the aborted fetal tissue, and they're packed with this new organism, which is also on the feed, which has been treated with Roundup.
By organism, you're talking about a bacterium?
It's new to science. It's the size of a virus, so it's only seen under an electron microscope. It's never been characterized before.
Now, you know, viruses are those weird kind of in-between where we're not sure if it's alive and we're not sure it's not, because they don't excrete, they don't metabolize. It's basically DNA.
This is not a virus, though. This is not a virus. It's not a lot of things. It's probably something like a fungus that's a microfungus, but they've never seen it before. They're isolating the DNA right now.
Whoa. Whoa.
I know. I mean, it gets stranger than truth.
There are those who suggest that all of this is just a byproduct of globalization. How do you respond to that?
Well, what I've seen traveling to 34 countries is that Monsanto surfs on globalization and corrupts and captures governments all over. So it's not just the byproduct. I'd say it's an epitome of an incredible global takeover. When you look at the speech that was given by Monsanto's consultant, Arthur Anderson, in 1999, January, they described that the ideal future of Monsanto's executives was a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented and had Monsanto's associated chemicals sold alongside that. And they created the plan to create the strategy and tactics to achieve that ideal future within 15 to 20 years.
Amazing. So is this just Monsanto? Are there other companies involved?
Monsanto, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, and Bayer, the 5 major GM crops.
Tell me what gene drift is.
Gene drift. I plant over here, my pollen comes up, doesn't read the sign that says do not spray, it's non-GMO, comes over, cross-pollinates with your plants, or the seeds blow over. Right. Or a passing truck comes and delivering canola seeds, and the wind blows and it ends up on your farm. There's no coexistence that's possible because nature has figured out a way to spread her bounty over centuries and millennia.
And this gene drift is not just a problem with soybeans to soybeans.
No,
I mean, there's lots of other stuff growing around those soybeans.
Canola to mustard, canola to broccoli, relatives, wild relatives and domestic relatives, sugar beets to chard.
Right. So and it could just as easily go to things that we don't eat, but other parts of the ecosystem eat, to the grasses or what we would call weeds that the rabbits are eating.
And now try and recall it. Impossible. It's a self-propagating pollution of gene pool.
Oh, you can't recall the gene because once it's in nature, it's in nature.
Exactly. So it's going to go beyond the effects of global warming, beyond nuclear waste. It's, at this point in our science, it's permanent, self-propagating pollution.
So what do? We have a little less than a minute left here.
First of all, we have to cap it. Right now, the good news is this. We know from Europe, even a small percentage of consumers avoiding GMOs can drive it out of the market with a tipping point. So we're educating people at responsibletechnology.org with information that changes people's diet, and at non-GMOshoppingguide.com you can learn how to avoid GMOs. But now there's a labeling initiative in California where if it wins in November, GMOs will be labeled. 53% of Americans say they would avoid GMOs if labeled. I think that the companies would rather eliminate GMOs than admit they use them. Yeah. So winning in California is essential right now.
Amazing. And spreading the word.
Yes.
Jeffrey, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Honor to meet you. To see this or other Conversations with Great Minds, go to our website at conversationswithgreatminds.